Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton, Deputy Editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this Photoshop video lesson on creating panoramic images. Whether you're shooting in the city, the countryside, or even at the coast, making a panoramic image is a great way of showing off your favourite locations at home or abroad. The extra wide view that you'll get from shooting and stitching several separate images means that you can pack in loads of lovely detail and produce images that are sure to impress anyone who sees them. It's great to see your friends and family poring over these big views and discovering tiny hidden details, and with today's digital cameras and software, they couldn't be simpler to create. Once you've followed the shooting tips in this month's magazine, you'll have a series of pictures ready to be turned into a sweeping panorama, and that's where Photoshop or Elements comes in. As you'll see in this lesson, if you give the software the right kind of images to start with, the actual stitching is very simple, and mostly an automated process. Before we get to that point though, we'll look at readying the shots for stitching, and after the stitch, see how you can clean up the results. So let's close down a couple of our example panoramics here, and we'll be concentrating on this coastal panorama that was shot in Wales next the sea. And if I just take a moment to click through the various layers that make up the image, you'll see how it was put together. So starting off with a single image, Photoshop stitches the various layers together. Then we can straighten up the image, bring out the colour and the saturation, improve the lighting, and end up with a result that we're really happy with. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is open up the raw files that we shot and make a few tweaks to them. So I'll close down the finished shot here, then we'll come up to File, Open, and the first of these raws that we're going to look at, which you'll find on this month's CD, is called Wales01.dng. Just click on that, then click Open, and that'll launch the raw file into the Adobe Camera Raw interface. Now, depending on the version of Photoshop or Elements that you're using, you may see fewer sliders and tabs in here, but the main sliders that we're going to be using are common to all versions. And with this first image, it's immediately apparent that we're going to have to bring back some detail into the sky here, perk up the colours, and also warm things up a little bit. So we'll come over to the temperature slider first, and just give that a click, and drag it over to 5500. Next up, we're going to make a change to the exposure slider, clicking and dragging that down to -1 stop, and as I do that you'll see a fair amount of that detail return in the sky. I'm also just going to push the recovery slider all the way up to 100, just bringing back a few more of those burnt out areas, giving us a more balanced exposure. Then I'm going to bring the fill light up to about 19 or 20, and move the black slider up to 16. Further down we're going to push the clarity up to +50, the vibrance to +40, and the saturation to +10. And those last few sliders there have just brought a nice level of increased contrast into the image, and also kind of perked up those colours. A lot of nice colours in these beach huts, so it'd be a shame to waste them. It's just worth noting though, before we continue, that when you are using these exposure sliders here, if you just press the Alt key down on the keyboard and hold that, you get a little preview as you click and drag that slider of which areas are burning out. So it's a very helpful one to use that, just to make sure that you're not losing detail in various parts of the image. Same goes for the black slider down here. There you can see that if we push and pull that maybe up to about 20 there, we're getting a tiny amount of black in that closest beach hut, but the rest of the image is looking fine. So that's it for the sliders under the Basic tab. But of course these settings are specific to this image, so when you're using your own panoramic shots, you'll certainly be using some different settings. The main thing though is to make sure that we've got a nice balanced exposure, we've improved the colours and the contrast, and we haven't got too many areas that are kind of too dark or too light. So the next thing we're going to do is click on the Lens Corrections tab. This one's only available in the full version of Photoshop. And because we've got a little bit of vignetting and fringing in our image here, I'll just zoom in nice and close so you can see what's taking place there. We've got a little bit of kind of green and red fringing on this beach hut here. I'm going to move the red cyan slider down to -27, and the blue yellow fringe slider up to +10. Just sorting out that fringing that was there, and then coming back to a full view, I'm also going to use this lens vignetting slider, just pushing that up to about plus 35, just lightening up those corners, because they might give Photoshop a little problem when it tries to stitch the various images together. There'll be too much of a shift in darkness towards the edge of the frame, so we'll just correct that using that slider. And once we're done with that, we can simply click Open Image. That'll load our raw file with all those changes that we've made into Photoshop. But of course, before we continue and start stitching these various shots together, I have to process the rest of the raws. So it's back up to File, down to Open, and this time we'll click on the first of the raws, hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, and then click on the last one. That'll highlight them all, and then when we click Open, they'll all load into the camera raw interface at the same time. There you can see them on the left-hand side. Now what I want to do is apply exactly the same settings that I've just used to all these different raw files. And the way I'm going to do that is just by, again, holding down the Shift key and clicking on the bottom raw, or you can also click the Select All button up there at the top. Just make sure that they're all highlighted. And then just going to come over to this little flyout menu on the right-hand side of the Basic tab and pick Previous Conversion. As soon as I do that, all of those settings we just used are copied across, and we've got a nice range of consistent images to work with. And just before I click that Open Images button down at the bottom to load all of them into Photoshop so we can start our stitching, let's just click on and off the preview icon there, and you can see what a dramatic change we've made just by shifting a few of those sliders around. So another good example of why you should be shooting RAW. But we're not talking specifically about RAW here, we're talking about panoramic images. So let's click the Open Images button, load all of those separate shots into Photoshop, and we can get started stitching them together. Okay, so here we are with all our processing complete, and if I just come up to Window, down to Arrange and pick Tile there, you will see our 6 separate images displayed on screen. Just zoom out a little bit on that bottom right one, and then we'll come back up to Image, down to Arrange and pick Match Zoom, and there are our separate shots. And you'll see we've got a nice kind of consistent lighting between them now, so it shouldn't present Photoshop with too many problems when it comes to stitching them together. So we can start that process now just by coming up to File, down to Automate, and clicking on the option called Photo Merge. Now if you're using Elements software, you'll need to take a slightly different route here. Just go to the File menu, down to New, and pick Photo Merge Panorama. But when you click on the option, you'll get a very similar window to this one. So as I said before, because we've given Photoshop some pretty consistent images to work with, we're going to be able to use the Auto option in here. Just make sure that's clicked under Layout. Then over on the right hand side of the window, click the Add Open Files button. That'll load the RAWs that we've just converted, and then before you hit OK, make sure that the Blend Images Together box down at the bottom there is ticked. And when you're done with that, just click OK, and Photoshop will start to do its stuff, automatically blending those 6 shots together into one really stunning panorama. Now depending on the size and number of images that you use, this might take a few moments, so I'll join you in a second. Okay, so here we are with all our separate images stitched together, thanks to Photoshop for that. And if I just bring up the Layers palette on screen, just come up to Window and down to Layers to find yours. Just drag this one in from the side here, and we'll just blow up the view on these thumbnails here so we can have a bit of a look at how the image has been stitched together. As you can see, each layer within here has been sort of subtly distorted by Photoshop so it matches up with the next one, and it's also applied a mask to each layer, blending them together into one single extra wide image. We're not quite there yet, of course, because we've still got all this empty space around the side of our picture. That's pretty normal when you're stitching a panoramic together. We'll also just need to straighten up the shot a little bit and apply a few changes to the lighting and the contrast before it's finished and we're really happy with it. So first I'm just going to close down some of these, or in fact all of these raw conversions that we made. Just clear up our workspace a little bit. There we go. And then to collapse all of our separate layers into one single background layer and make things a little bit easier to work on, we'll just come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. Next up, we're going to need to crop out some of these white areas around the edge, but we're going to want to leave as much of the detail in the photo as possible. We can straighten things up a fair amount at the same time too, just by using the crop tool here in the toolbox. Make sure that these width and height boxes up here in the options bar are empty. If they're not, just hit clear. And then just zooming in on the left hand edge of our picture, I'm just going to draw out the crop marquee there. And if you look very closely, you can see that the horizon is on a slightly different slant. We know that our crop marquee there is perfectly horizontal. So what I'm going to do is just move the cursor slightly outside of that marquee, and just click and drag it around ever so slightly until it matches up with the slant of that horizon. Then we can just click on those corner handles, drag it out, actually just come back out to a full view, drag the marquee over all those areas of the image that we want to keep. Don't worry about leaving a few of these kind of little areas of white around the top of the sky there. We want to include a fair amount of this sky, so we'll attend to those in a minute. And when you've got a crop that you're happy with, double click inside the marquee. That'll crop out those areas that we didn't want, and at the same time we've just rotated the image slightly to get a nice level horizon. So next up, let's deal with these rather offensive empty areas at the top in the sky there. We're going to do this using the clone stamp tool, so give that a click in the toolbox, and then we'll need a really big brush because we're handling sort of lots of pixels here. Click on that 300 pixel brush there just to give us a head start, and then we'll use the right hand square bracket key just to blow it up really big. Make sure that the mode is set to normal, opacity is at 100%, and then holding down the Alt key on the keyboard, we can simply click to sample an area of the sky and then just kind of paint it in there in the corner. Just sort of clicking and sampling as we go, trying not to kind of repeat too many of the patterns in the clouds there. You can spend a bit of time on this just to make sure that you get something that you're happy with. And that's kind of looking okay. Got a little bit of sand down here in the bottom left hand corner, so we'll just kind of paint that away too. Same for the bottom right. And then we can deal with the sky up here as well, just as we did before, just clicking to sample and then just painting in over those white areas, just giving us a nice kind of believable sky at the top there. Right, so that's dealt with the sky. What I'm next going to do is just add a couple of levels adjustment layers just to sort out the lighting on our beat charts here. Darken the sky off a little bit towards the top, and also maybe just darken the sand ever so slightly towards the bottom of the picture there, just kind of concentrating all our attention on these nice bright huts. So let's come over to the toolbox again, pick the lasso tool, and then I'm simply going to draw a very rough selection over all of those beach huts and then kind of back along the sand underneath them. Release the mouse button and the marching ants will appear, and then up here in the options bar we'll click on the refine edge button. Make sure our little preview there is set to the quick mask, bring that radius down to 0, smoothness down to 0, and then we'll push that feathering all the way up to about 200 pixels. That should be about fine. Click OK, and then down here in the layers palette, going to click on the create new adjustment layer icon, pick levels from the list, and then I'll just click and drag this white point slider just over to the left a little bit, over to about 200 as an input level there, and then also drag the middle slider left just a little bit, just lightening up the center of the picture there. And because we're using Photoshop CS4 here, we don't need to press OK to exit those changes we made to the levels there. But if you're using earlier versions or elements, you will just need to click that OK button. Now, as I said, we have caused just a little bit of burnout here on the right-hand side of the panoramic image. Some of these huts are losing detail. So what I'm going to do is just click on that mask icon in the layers palette there. Come over to the brush tool. Make sure that the foreground color is set to black. We can do that by pressing D on the keyboard and then X to switch those two around. And then I'm just going to paint some black into that mask, just bringing back the detail there quite subtly. And we can do that to anywhere else that needs it in our picture. And you'll just see a few kind of blobs of black appearing in that mask, just showing the way we're kind of holding back the levels adjustment that we made and keeping the exposure nice and balanced. Okay, so we're also going to make a slight adjustment to the sky and the foreground in terms of the levels and the lighting there. So it's back over to the lasso tool, and then we're just going to kind of draw that up over the edges of the sky, back round the top of the image. Click on that refine edge button again. Once again, we'll use quite a large feather radius, this time up at the maximum of 250. Click OK. Then I'm going to add another levels adjustment layer, and this time I'm going to push that middle slider just a little bit over to the right. And as I do that, you can see I'm just darkening the sky down a little bit, and that's kind of looking okay. Once again, if you're using an earlier version of Photoshop or Elements, you'll have to press that OK button. But here I'm just going to make another selection just along the foreground, back down the bottom, back up to our refine edge button. We'll use the same feather radius as last time. That's 250 pixels. Click OK. And then we'll add a final levels adjustment layer. And once again, just click and drag that middle slider over, not too far, just to about 80 or so as an input level. And then we're darkening that sand that's a little closer to the viewer and just concentrating the eye a little bit more on those beach huts. Okay, so that's all there is to it really. We've very quickly and easily created a really nice panoramic image. Most of the work done for us thankfully by Photoshop with all that stitching and blending together, but we've just kind of improved the results slightly once Photoshop was finished with that. Just mainly working on the contrast of the picture and kind of bringing all the attention into those huts in the centre of the picture. So I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. Make sure you give it a go, because as you'll see from reading this month's guide on taking better pictures anywhere you go, you can shoot a great panorama in pretty much any location. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.